Thank you for joining us in the Trustworthy ML's Un-Symposium. We're really glad to welcome you today. The theme of the Un-Symposium is called The Invisible Elephant in the Room. I'm going to explain how we came up with this topic in a few minutes. But first, to do some preliminaries. This event is live streamed and recorded. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, please exit Zoom. And then you can watch on YouTube. The YouTube link can be found on our website, as well as on the slide as well. And for the social that happens at 1:15 p.m. Eastern time, that part onwards will not be recorded or streamed. So we welcome you to join us back then in Zoom. Note that the social happens in a separate Zoom link. And by joining this event, you also agree to abide by the code of conduct as well. So I'm going to pause for a few seconds here to allow anyone who doesn't want to appear in the recording to exit Zoom and adjourn to YouTube. Great. Welcome back again. My name is Sarah Tan, and I'm one of the organizers of the Trustworthy ML Initiative. Together with the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, we at the Trustworthy ML Institute are so happy to welcome you to this 1-year anniversary event today. We've put together a pretty exciting program. I'm going to give the opening remarks, and 10 minutes from now, we start the program with a panel on interdisciplinary research in trustworthy ML. We have a little break for 15 minutes. At 12 p.m. Eastern time, we have a town hall on the practical challenges of applying trustworthy ML in industry. 1 p.m., we have another break. At this time, we'll move to a separate Zoom link. And finally, at 1:15 p.m. Eastern time until 3 o'clock Eastern time, we're going to have a social with breakout rooms and research sharing. So yeah, pretty exciting program, and we hope you stay with us or come in and out as you wish. We really want today's program to be really interactive, so we welcome you to post comments and questions anytime in the Zoom Q&A too, and also remember to stay for the social as well, where there's going to be a lot of interactive components. So yeah, I just wanted to really thank everyone from the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, as well as all my fellow organizers and advisors from the Trustworthy ML Initiative. Over this last year, we've done some amazing things together. So, it's been a really great time. So yeah, looking forward to our next year going, year 2. Here is our 1-year anniversary look back. Just a quick overview of what happened in the last year. We've had 23 biweekly seminars covering a variety of topics. We have 3,500 Twitter followers, and we work hard to generate content and paper highlights and things like that. We have opportunities for early career and underrepresented researchers to highlight their work. For example, we've had 10 rising star speakers so far, profiled 22 students and postdocs on Twitter, and highlighted many papers. We have opportunities for newcomers, like compilations of resources and tutorials, and held some networking socials. So in year 2, we are going to be focusing on a few things. First of all, we want to open source our resources section. So we want to call for the community to contribute links to good papers, good tutorials, videos, talks, things like that. Please stay tuned for more info on how that will be done. We're also going to have more opportunities for research collaborations, and we are considering doing a conference. So yeah, please, stay tuned for more information. And if you have any suggestions at any time, please also contact us. And now I want to bring everyone back to the topic of this symposium, the reason why we're gathering in the room today. What is the invisible elephant in the room? When we first started planning this symposium, we thought about the things that concern us as machine learning researchers and practitioners. Are the models that we make behaving as we expect in the real world? Are they being misused for applications that we never considered that they would be used for when we make them? are they changing, are they adapting to the changes that happen in the world as we speak? And of course, like when the paper says that a method is really good and exceeds SOTA on the benchmarks, can it actually be deployed in practice? What happens there? Yeah. So to bring it back, the invisible elephant in the room is things that we are not considering yet, things that are looming on the horizon, the unknown unknowns, so to speak. As I look back at the last few years, this has been a really interesting time in trustworthy ML research because the invisible elephant actually changes all the time. I remember 5 to 7 years ago, maybe, the FACCT conference was still a workshop and fairness research was only starting to heat up. And back then, people were coming up with fairness metrics and training machine learning models to optimize them. And then came the realization that fairness does not exist in the mathematical void, and such optimizations alone are not enough. And I also remember when certain research threads popped up, when adversarial training became popular and everyone started training GANs, for example. And then we started seeing a blend of techniques from different fields. For example, counterfactual explanations, adversarial robustness. Currently, we're worried about foundation models, large-scale self-supervised learning models with unforeseen biases. So we clearly see how there are trends in trustworthy ML work, just like any other research area has trends. And yet some things remain constant throughout all of it. We still worry about how to measure if a model is interpretable, understandable to a human. How do we manage all these different fairness trade-offs? And what is the next big technique that's going to come along? When I was making this slide, I polled some of my fellow organizers and asked them what do they think the invisible elephant in the room is. And here on the slide you see, I put up people's responses. This is roughly the responses fell into 3 clusters. So this on the slide here, these are the first cluster. These are kind of like the definitions of trustworthiness. What makes a model trustworthy? How do we measure this? Should trustworthy models be more trustworthy than humans? Must a trustworthy model align with human values? Is it ethical to train a trustworthy model and call this whatever this model is that you train, call it trustworthy, if training it takes a lot of computational resources or infringes on privacy, or somehow it has like negative aspects like that? And are there applications for which one should not try to learn a trustworthy model or in fact a model at all? The second cluster is a little more prosaic and practical, let's say. Does the proposed method work beyond the benchmarks? Is it as cool as it claims to be? What happens when I actually deploy this in practice? What are the considerations that me as a practitioner has to know that the paper didn't mention? How often do ML practitioners actually work with social scientists and other domain experts in making ML models? And how important is that contribution? And finally, the third cluster is what I would call something about the interaction of models and like the world, the setting in which they're being used. How can we globalize the discourse around trustworthy ML? Whose voices are we living right now? When companies say that a new AI-based product is fair, for instance, a camera that distinguishes darker skin tones, is it greenwashing? AI never works alone. How can we make companies that use AI trustworthy? If we evaluate and audit AI, should we also evaluate and audit companies? Hopefully it's clear by now that there is no one constant invisible elephant in the room. And today's symposium is exactly to gather all of us together so we can talk about what the invisible elephant in the room for us is. And with that, I welcome you to the symposium. Please use the Zoom Q&A to post any questions and comments throughout this symposium. And we really look forward to hearing from you what the invisible elephant in the room for you is. Thank you so much once again and welcome. And next, I wanted to invite to the stage, the virtual stage, so to speak, Subo Majumdar, who's going to be the moderator for the next part of the program, which is the panel.
Hi everyone, my name is Shubha Majumdar, and I'll be with you for the next hour hosting our panel discussion with our esteemed guests, Professor Dr. Daniel Belgrave, Professor Tom Dietrich, and Kush Varshney. Before we jump into the panel, which is going to be on interdisciplinary machine learning in general and how the values of trustworthy machine learning have been and we think should be or would be incorporated in the future. So let me share my slides for a moment and introduce our panelists. Okay, our first panelist is Dr. Daniel Belgrave from DeepMind. Her specialty is statistics and machine learning, and specifically the use of machine learning techniques to understand progression of diseases, personalized medicine, and using techniques, statistical techniques such as latent variable models, Bayesian models, and survival analysis. Dr. Belgrave has been at Microsoft Research previously and also GlaxoSmithKline. She's the part of the regulatory algorithms project to evaluate how healthcare algorithms should be evaluated. Dr. Belgrave has been on the organizing committee of NeurIPS 2019, and she's also an advisor for Deaf Africa AI. Dr. Belgrave, great to have you with us. Our next panelist is Professor Tom Dietrich. Professor Dietrich is one of the pioneers of the field of machine learning, specifically because of the fundamental focus of his research that are aimed at answering questions, very salient questions about how to make computer systems that adapt and learn from experience, or how to build intelligent systems that are not only integrating with other advances in AI and combined human knowledge, but also are robust to errors that are known and unknown, to robust to uncertainty. Professor Dietrich you probably have interacted with him unknowingly, maybe, if you have submitted a paper to CSLG in archive, because he's one of the moderators of CSLG archive. Professor Dietrich is a member of the advisory board of JMLR. He's the former president of AAAI, past president of the International Machine Learning Society. He's also the co-founder of multiple companies, and he's currently serving as the chief scientist of BigML as well. Finally, our third panelist is Dr. Kush Varshney from IBM Research. He's a distinguished research staff member and manager with IBM Research, where he leads the machine learning group in the foundations of Trustworthy AI. His passion has been the application of data science and predictive analytics to social good problems, human capital management, and algorithmic fairness, as well as foundational theoretical research on trustworthy machine learning methods in general. Dr. Varshney has been the founding co-director of the IBM Social Good Initiatives. He has been the awardee of many IBM awards. He's currently a senior member of the IEEE, a member of the Partnership of AI. He has won many best paper awards, and also currently in the process of writing a book on trustworthy machine learning. So with that, let's begin our panel discussion, and it's great to have everybody here. Not only our panelists, Daniel, Tom, and Kush, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us, to share your wisdom, but also to our partners, Montreal AI Ethics Institute, Abhishek and team. and also our team, the Trustworthy ML team, and finally, last but not the least, our audience members. Thanks a lot for being with us. You are what makes us Trustworthy ML Initiative. So thank you. So with that, let's jump into the first question of the panel, which I'm going to ask to all our panelists. So essentially, the idea is that can you give us a lay of the land for the intersection of interdisciplinary research and Trustworthy ML Initiative? Trustworthy machine learning. You are all established researchers in the field. So how, in your experience, has this landscape evolved as trustworthy machine learning methods got introduced and gained more and more popularity in the last 5 years or so, maybe a little more than last 5 years? And how has this cross-pollination between cross-collaboration between interdisciplinary work and trustworthy machine learning methods have evolved, or what has your experience been in this area? So I'll start with Dr. Belgrave. Daniel, please, if you could share your experience with us, that would be a great start to our panel.
I was actually hoping that you'd start with the person who's writing the book, because I was hoping to get the answer for this first. But so I think this is a field that has evolved quite a lot, the whole field of trustworthy ML. And maybe it's evolved, at least my understanding is that it's evolved more out of necessity and seeing things that have gone wrong in the fields of artificial intelligence in cross-disciplinary research. And it's seen as, how can we rectify it? So it's almost like an appendage. So we have mistakes that were made in the past in implementation of AI and implementation of machine learning algorithms. And this field, I think, was born a bit out of that necessity of seeing things gone wrong, and how can we rebalance the equilibrium in this space. So I think that this is really important, that consciousness that we have made mistakes in the past. So how can we increase trust in machine learning algorithms, and also on the other side, create AI and machine learning solutions that are trustworthy. I was reading a paper the other day that came out in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, a couple of months ago, talking about, is artificial intelligence does it actually stand for augmenting inequality? And I think this is one of the big parameters, and really one of the big drives for trustworthy ML, that we see that there have been these inequalities that have been raised in the past. So how can we rectify it? So I guess my hope is that that through this panel we can discuss some of these issues, and I'm quite keen to hear what the other panelists have to say.
Thanks a lot, Daniel, for kind of kicking off the discussion and putting kind of setting the tone of what we're about to expect. And I totally agree with you. Those are some of the things that I'd like to talk in detail with all of you. So Tom, could you please share your experiences and thoughts with us on this topic as well?
Well, yeah, let me start by agreeing with Danielle. I think it's very natural, of course, for organizations to be in a reactive mode, where we wait until something goes wrong and then try to fix it. But it seems and machine learning itself, I think. So I've been doing a lot of work on anomaly detection, change detection. And I feel like it has that same weakness that, we deploy the machine learning system, and then we add, say, an anomaly detection system on top of it to look for potential problems. And if we see them, then we react to them. And so I'm interested in trying to move beyond that, both, technically at the algorithm level, but also organizationally. How can we try to anticipate the things that are going to go wrong, address them before we harm anyone. And so I think, on the technical side, of course, we're thinking about maybe more robust approaches, but algorithmically speaking. But it seems that we also, if we need to embrace the principles of participatory design, we need people with, say, expertise in anthropology to be parts of our design team, so that we can have a better understanding of the application context, and we need to do better pilot study work. And a lot of this has been true for human-computer interaction for decades, right? But I guess I feel like the machine learning community, until 15 years ago, no one was using our stuff anyway, and so we didn't really pay attention to these issues. But now, obviously, we have a huge responsibility to do so.
Thanks a lot, Tom. And I'm glad that you brought up the issue, the idea of having more collaborative teams in general from the get-go. So, which I personally think is one of the essential ingredients of a successful interdisciplinary project. So thanks for that. Kush, your turn. Please, if you'd like to share your thoughts.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Danielle and Tom already, said a lot. So I guess a couple of things that I would maybe add on is that even the word trustworthy, I think, has different conceptions in lots of different fields, whether it's in psychology or sociology or organizational management, etc. And even just defining what we mean when we say trustworthy, I think can have a lot of value by engaging with these various sort of disciplines. And so just recently, I'm starting to kick off a project with a philosopher at SUNY Albany, Jason DeCruz, and his whole work is the philosophy of what trustworthiness is. And I think we're going to learn a lot. I mean, he hasn't thought about things in the context of machine learning and AI, and we haven't really engaged with that whole literature. And so I think even just starting at the very basics of what it is that trustworthiness is going to be something that we can learn a lot from. There was this very well cited paper by Tim Miller on different social science conceptions of explainability, and I think that's had a big effect. And I think the same thing can be done more broadly as well. So I think there's plenty to learn in every direction, and I think the best research is actually at the intersections of different fields. So I'm hoping to see where this goes.
Thanks, Kush, on both kind of reinforcing Tom's point about the interdisciplinary teams, interdisciplinary cross collaborations, and also kind of focusing on what does trust mean and what does trustworthiness mean in different contexts, different use cases, different use case contexts. So yeah, we definitely are going to talk more about in this about the whole domain of interdisciplinary research and the intersection with trustworthy work. But before that, let me just mention a couple of points. Please feel free to add in your questions and upvote others' questions in the Q&A tool. This is for the audience members. And we are going to take your questions in the end. We have reserved time for 10 minutes in the last, for the last 10 minutes of the hour for question and answers. So before that, please feel free to post your questions. Okay, so in the next part, I'm going to first dive into a little bit on the, Yeah, so I'm going to dive in a little bit on the deficiencies in the field, essentially. We now have the idea that what has worked, how has things evolved, what are the kind of the needs in the field. So maybe we could elaborate a little bit on those parts, specifically that what parts can we do better. And I think we do have some common threads. Essentially, we could collaborate more as a community. The CS community could collaborate more with other disciplines. The machine learning community, the methodological machine learning community can collaborate more with other disciplines. So maybe along those lines, kind of expanding on those points and maybe bring up new points of discussion. So Kush, I'm going to start with you for this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there's, asking about deficiencies is interesting way to put it. I'm not sure I would call it deficiencies per se, but more of a journey, like Tom was saying, right? So when it was before machine learning was really used in anything productive, it wasn't, it was okay to kind of be in a silo in some sense, but that clearly has changed over, I think Tom said 15 years, and I would agree. So in that journey, I would say that, overall, there's kind of a lot to learn, and I think the specific areas, some of them that I would point out, one is just taking machine learning seriously. It's not a science experiment anymore, right? So there's a lot of engineering disciplines, for example, that have been built around safety and kind of reliability, and there's a lot to learn there. So one analogy I like to give is with commercial aviation. So we can say that the first 50 years of aviation were about from 1903, when the Wright brothers had their first flight, to about 1958, when the Boeing 707 was released, which is the first commercial jet. And those first 50 years were all about just figuring out how to make planes fly and so forth. But since then, the second 50 years after 1958, there's been not much of a change in like the basics of the airplanes. I mean, they have the same basic functionality, they fly at the same speed and everything else, but there's been a huge improvement in the safety and efficiency of those aircraft. And I think there's a statistic since the 1970s, maybe it's like a 300-fold reduction in the fatality rate per miles flown, or something like that, right? So if we take the analogy to machine learning, or more broadly to AI, so we can say the first 50 years were from, let's say, 1956, the Dartmouth Conference, to about 2012 or so, which is when the deep learning won the ImageNet competition, right? So again, all of it spent on just trying to understand how machine learning or AI should work. And now we are at that second 50 years at the beginning of it, and it should all, the focus should shift in some sense to the safety, reliability, trust in general, right? Fairness, etc. So I think the more we interact with these other fields, like whatever, mechanical engineering, aviation, whatever, those are going to teach us a lot about how to do testing, how to do governance of processes, things of that sort, and even just defining safety. So we had a paper a few years ago which used some definitions from safety engineering to define what it means for machine learning to be safe in terms of risk and epistemic uncertainty. And I think just taking lessons and applying them is what our mission should be in the second 50 years that we're in.
So, Kush, I have a small follow-up on that. Yeah, definitely. I think I get what you're saying, is that initially the effort was to make it work, and now that we know that, okay, this thing works, machine learning works, now the second wave of development should focus quite a bit on how to build guardrails so that the workflows can be more efficient and safe and sustainable in general. So I guess my sought, and this is what I personally think about a lot as well, is that who bells the cat? Is it those who apply? Is it regulators? Is it governments? Yeah, if you had any thoughts on that.
I mean, I think it has to be all of the above. I mean, it can't be just, I mean, the responsibility can't just be on one group or the other. And I mean, when you have regulated industries, it works a lot better when it's a collaborative effort. Look, in the finance world, the banks do the best they can to help the regulators regulate them and so forth. The more collaborative it is, the better, I think.
Okay, thanks a lot. That is definitely helpful. And I think we are going to discuss more on this or similar lines in our town hall as well later on, since this is also one of the invisible elephants in the room, so to speak, as Sarah mentioned in the beginning. So Tom, let me ask you the same question again then. What do you think are the deficiencies, or what can we do better as a field? And I know that you have some thoughts in our internal emails, as you have indicated. So over to you.
Well, yeah, I guess I think that there's still, and it's natural, but I think there's still too much of a focus on the technical artifact of the machine learning algorithm and the machine learning system, the data, the part that we as machine learning engineers are dealing with. But I'd say the biggest lesson for me in the last 10 years of trustworthiness and social impact and so on has been how tiny the machine learning component is in a larger application context. And this goes everywhere from just simple things like just the user interface and the user experience, all the way up to the larger impacts on society of having deployed AI technology, say in advertising or in engagement in social media. I feel like the elephant isn't in the room; it's actually outside the room. Or maybe the other analogy is that machine learning is like, I don't know, the eyelash on the elephant, and there's a lot more there that we have to understand how we interact with all of that. So while that's a useful metaphor, what does it really tell us? Well, what Kush was just saying about safety and what people have learned is that, to make aircraft safe, it's not enough to, have excellent jet propulsion or, to have a good radios or whatever, but also we need to have strong procedures in the cockpit. As some of you know, I've been reading a little bit in the organizational management literature about how we establish and maintain a culture of safety in an organization. And part of that is thinking about is an area of practice called cockpit safety. Cockpit resource management, which is when the pilots are in some sort of a crisis, there's a tendency for their attention to become very focused on one thing and for them to ignore other things. And in particular, there is a strict hierarchy in these kinds of systems where the pilot in command is God and everybody else is supposed to take commands from him. But if his attention gets focused on the wrong thing, the idea of cockpit resource management is training in techniques for breaking into his focus and pulling him out of it and saying, we've got to worry about this other thing. And so this is actually a human skill that needs to be developed. Now you say, well, what does that have to do with the technology in the cockpit? Well, the user interface design can lead to can cause this attention problem, right? We know that attention investment is a critical thing to look at in any user interface, and I recommend to people, if you're interested in this kind of thing, to look at David Woods' work at Ohio State University. He did a whole bunch of studies on the effects of autopilot being introduced in the 1970s and 80s. And one of the problem with the autopilot was that it lacked situational awareness of what else was going on in the aircraft. All it knew, it was just the controller for keeping, say, straight and level flight for the aircraft. And it was up to the, usually the co-pilot to keep typing in new coordinates, updating the goals of the autopilot, deciding when to turn it off and intervene. And that ended up stealing a lot of the attention of the co-pilot, so that they're spending all their time interacting with the user interface instead of themselves being aware of the broader situation. So that's an example in a safety critical case where the if we could have designed co-pilots to have, or autopilots to have more situational awareness. For instance, if the autopilot could understand the radio communications and know that the tower had just told the plane to go to a different location than it was, or to descend to some other elevation, then the co-pilot wouldn't have to be entering that information in manually. So that's the issue is we have human attention and the user interface, and then the capabilities, the technical capabilities. But that's just one tiny example of the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about.
Thanks, Tom. That's a great analogy. And so if I could kind of try to transfer that analogy to the machine learning domain, I guess that would equate to more focus on data collection and the design of the model and incorporation of domain knowledge using using existing human knowledge.
Yeah, so let's talk about a much more sensitive topic, which is face recognition. Okay, we focus in our discussions, typically technical discussions, all about the accuracy of the system, its failures in various subpopulations and things like this. And those are all very important issues. But let's think about the deployment context. If we know the system is going to make errors and those are going to have an impact on people, then there needs to be a person who's monitoring the system at all times. We can't have face recognition being operated completely autonomously offline, because there needs to be some awareness of the situation in which it's being applied. Because we know it's going to have failure modes, someone needs to be able to intervene in those failure modes. One of the important principles of these high reliability human organizations is that we should be constantly looking for errors and near misses, anomalies in near misses, because those give us evidence about the unknown failure modes in our system that we need to study. So when we think about having face recognition being used in, I don't know, say, the example I gave in one of my papers was scanning the people who are attending the European, championships in football, looking for people who have arrest warrants out to them. We know there will be false alarms in that, and some human needs to be involved in screening those. And we need to evaluate the trustworthiness of the combined human plus face recognition system, not just assume the face recognition system is fine. And of course, that has to overcome the human bias to tend to trust systems, especially if they've been labeled as intelligent or artificially intelligent. And so, well, enough said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Tom. That I think nails, or pretty much nails, in my view, it kind of clears up in my head what trustworthiness should be about, which is trustworthiness of the whole system, not only the trustworthiness of the model, and taking into account the human biases and human priors, so to speak, that feed into the models implicitly, feed into the model decisions implicitly. So yeah, thanks for elaborating on that. Daniel, I was wondering that kind of on the similar vein as what Kush and Tom mentioned, you also have extensive experience and expertise in the medical domain in general, in personalized medicine and other areas where there are like established modeling techniques that are integrated with regulations, for example, survival analysis and clinical trials. So I was interested in knowing how has your experience been, and could you share your wisdom with us regarding how the aspects of trust have been handled in the medical domain before the whole trustworthy machine learning thing came in, and how things are evolving, and also definitely how can we do better?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So one thing I've been reflecting, hearing Kush and Tom's contribution, has been the whole question of trustworthiness. So Kush, in his first intervention, said, what does trustworthiness mean, and how does this apply to a machine learning model? And hearing the examples given, it feels as though maybe trustworthy as a definition of a machine learning model is a bit of an anthropomorphism, where we're giving it characteristics that we don't demand from other domains. We don't demand that the media is trustworthy. We talk about the media not being trustworthy, for example, but we don't necessarily have this dimension. But one thing that has been coming up in a lot of the examples is the concept of safety. So what we want to prioritize isn't necessarily the trust. Trust can be an added extra, but we want to make sure things are safe for when we deploy things in the population. I think this is very much the perspective of more regulatory systems as well. When you think of healthcare, very often, if you have an algorithm that's going to be deployed in the wild, you want it to be regulated. So there has been a move with the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to regulate algorithms that would be used in medical devices. So this is a process. So there are differences between when something is used as a medical device and when it's used as a non-medical device as well. So there are differences in how algorithms are marketed in those different contexts. In pharma is heavily regulated as well. And I think the regulation is to ensure safety and to ensure that they're not harms to different levels of the population. So that's why when you get prescriptions from the pharmacy, there's a long list of possible side effects that could happen. But I think one of the challenges with regulation is that it can't be at the cost of innovation as well. So it's very important that the AI community and machine learning right now, in most contexts, isn't regulated. So I think it's something to think about the perspective, from the perspective of this is something that could be regulated. But and it's important to have these conversations. But I think one of the challenges is, how do you make sure that this is still innovation, even if it's going to be a regulated community? I think things we could do better. I think what Tom was saying, that machine learning is a very small piece of the picture when we look at the discipline within which it's inserted, and giving the example of the in the cockpit, just a little part that's distracting the pilot and not sort of taking over the show and not necessarily enabling the pilot to do his job better, or her job better. And I think that it's really important to be inserted in communities. So there are things like FACT and NeurIPS as well, where we bring people from other domains into those communities. But I think it's also very important that as machine learning researchers, we also engage deeply with the communities where we're trying to create solutions for. So I think there's an aspect of interdisciplinary research and also cross-disciplinary research. So cross-disciplinary is thinking of machine learning algorithms, where we're going to deploy them. And for that, we need a deep embedded understanding of the domain that we're trying to influence. But also it's a challenge of communication across domains as well. And I think as machine learning algorithms get more and more complex, the challenge of communicating, and also the challenge of communicating to domain experts, gets gets harder as well. So communication, I think, is key. How do you communicate models to domain experts in a way that they can understand as well, and that they feel the methods are trustworthy or safe or whatever we want to say. So I think deep engagement with these communities is really important, and that's cross-disciplinary. Interdisciplinary, thinking of ways that we develop algorithms as well in interdisciplinary contexts. So examples of looking at machine learning for healthcare, developing algorithms there, not just with machine learning researchers, but also with domain experts, but people who are experts in human-computer interaction as well, who think about the usability of algorithms and having them as part of the conversation while we're developing models as well. So I think these are some areas where we can do better, and yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. And so if I could ask a follow-up question, one thing that you mentioned is, which definitely appealed to me, is the community engagement part, and not only like the side of who is building the model, but who is impacting the model. So yeah, I was thinking that from a implementation perspective, if you could offer any pointers about how to do that better. How do developers and model builders, essentially those who are making the model and using the model, how can they get feedback from whether the model is working or not, how to do things better?
I guess there are multiple challenges. So sometimes in aspects of deploying machine learning models, it's not necessarily a machine learning question. So this is why it's really important to work really closely with people who are experts at implementing things, like designers, people who work in the user interface as well. So machine learning is very much a backend in deployment. We're not the protagonists, I would say, but machine learning has to be very much linked to what are the use cases, what are the important use cases for implementation, and also what would that implementation look like. So it's very much a backend to that. I think it's very challenging to give a generalized framework for how that collaboration happens. So there has to be some sort of feedback, but the feedback has to be safe as well. So this is very challenging, especially if you're using, for example, RL systems. You can imagine an RL system in a healthcare setting. You don't necessarily want to test things on users unless you know that it's safe, but it's very hard to do that learning offline. It's very hard to learn the interaction with the environment if you don't have users to test it on. So sometimes there are certain models that, even though they work well in an offline setting, they may not work well on an online setting. So there are lots of ethical implications that need to be thought about, in that sort of interdisciplinary setting as well. So this is something that really needs to be interrogated really well, doing the user studies, working with the HCI community as well to engage this.
Yeah, I think that definitely sums it up regarding the feedback mechanism. Thanks for that, Daniel. So for the next thing I want to talk about is something that is, I think, starting to gain traction in the methodology community is, for example, developing methods that are fair and robust, developing methods that are robust and explainable, and choose M combinations, essentially, of fairness, explainability, etc., the different aspects of trust, essentially. So the idea being that how do we integrate the different aspects of trustworthiness in real life projects, how to sort of decide the sweet spot, the quote unquote best combination of how fair a model should be, how explainable a model should be, how robust a model should be, things like that. So Kush, I'd go to you with this question. I've seen your writings at different places regarding your thoughts on that. So yeah, if you could enlighten us.
Sure. Yeah, so I think there's a few different levels to that question to be answered. And the first level is, I mean, looking at your application domain, the problem that you're looking at, and trying to figure out which of those different so-called pillars of trustworthiness are relevant for your particular problem. So as an example, I mean, if the data is not about people, then it's probably not going to involve privacy as much as some other things. Or if the system is fully secure and on the back end, I mean, there's no way to really access it, and maybe adversarial robustness is less of an issue, and so forth. So I think and I think accuracy or in general basic performance is almost always, I mean, something that we need, right? So just going through and thinking about what are the sort of characteristics of your system and the problem setting to determine which of these pillars are actually relevant or, I mean, higher priority in the problem. So that's the first level question. Then you have the second level question, I think, which is choosing specific metrics for these different pillars of trust. So as we all know, there's, I mean, many different definitions of fairness. There's different ways to measure adversarial robustness, et cetera, right? So toward even, I mean, general like performance measures, like should you use AUC or should you use balanced accuracy or whatever. So, I mean, there's the question of choosing the metrics. Some of that choice, I think, is determined by kind of the worldview that you might have, especially on fairness metrics. But some of it are things that are maybe just hard to express explicitly. So there's some work by some folks at the University of Illinois on performance metric elicitation, which I think does a good job of working towards that. So using pairwise comparisons to figure out what are the actual metrics that you care about and so forth. So I think that gets us, I mean, part of the way. And then the last level is actually what are the ranges of the metric values that are acceptable. So in that, I think you need to actually determine the interrelationships, what are trade-offs, what are not trade-offs among these different pillars of trust. And that is an open question. We've started doing some empirical studies to understand these trade-offs and so forth. And some of them are not trade-offs, like I said, so you can achieve multiple things at the same time. We've also started doing some theoretical work using some information theoretic methods, but it's still a long ways off. And so, I mean, defining what that feasible space is among those trade-offs and non-trade-offs, and then eliciting what the actual values are. So it's a field or a topic that needs more study for sure. And then it has to be like this back and forth among different people. And as we've heard from Tom and Danielle already, this has to be a participatory process. I mean, it can't be just a single person making that determination for a very important deployed system, right? It has to include the voices of many different constituents, whether they're affected users or regulators or anyone else. So I think this is one of the biggest problems that our field should be working towards, and maybe we need more attention to it.
Thanks, Kush. So yeah, as I understand, and also I think one theme is emerging from our discussion right now is that the places where we probably could do better and the places where more resources of research and development should be is probably participatory methods and also qualitative methods to kind of get that feedback mechanism going, the feedback mechanism of trust going to and fro the stakeholders and those who are being impacted essentially. So Daniel, I also wanted to get your thoughts on this as well. So you mentioned that in the medical domain, how how does safety play a role, and the trade-offs with innovation and other aspects of trust that are being considered and have to be considered. So if you could elaborate on that, give your thoughts on how these, how the optimal trade-off can be decided.
So this is I think it's a challenge that needs innovation in itself. So just to bit contextualize, so very often, for example, in the pharmaceutical industry, where you're running clinical trials and trying to get something on the market, very often you're not allowed necessarily to innovate in that setting. So, for example, the statistical modeling or the machine learning modeling that you do has to be done in a certain way. And that's also to make sure that nobody fudges the books, so to speak, so that the algorithms are all performed in the same way. And usually what you have is two people who are able to replicate the same results at 10 with the error metrics of 0.1 by 10 to minus 6. So there's very little room for margins of error, which is probably good, but also it means that things have to be done in a certain fashion and that everybody does things the same way. So in this sense, I don't know how sustainable this is in a field where you want to innovate and make discovery. So if we take the same healthcare setting, you do have aspects of discovery, and a lot of the discovery in healthcare probably takes place mostly in academia, where it's not regulated as a setting. There's a lot more availability of data as well, and many studies start from hospitals, so innovation comes from those hospitals, and the machine learning algorithms come from those collaborations in a hospital setting, in an academic setting as well. So I guess the challenge is how to replicate this level of innovation in a pharmaceutical setting, for example, where you do have the resources to scale up. So I think this is something that's maybe improving with time. So one of the elements in pharma is a lot of looking towards real world evidence. So you have the clinical trials that are heavily regulated, but then real world evidence, lots of things happen in the wild. So how can we measure that? And I think pharma is going more and more towards understanding real world evidence, and that is one way of innovating. So looking at different frameworks for understanding how things that are regulated work in the wild. So I guess it's a mix between things that are more experimental in terms of design and things that are more observational. So where you have observational context and you want to make discovery there.
So I guess in the context of, I'm just trying to translate the analogy of real world evidence in the tech world, essentially in the tech product space, for example, like in recommendation systems or advertising or face recognition even. What would be sort of the directions that like could be? So essentially how would the translation look like? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Daniel, could you help me?
Yeah, that's an interesting.
I can't hear Danielle.
Yeah.
So I guess the question should be, well, how can we make sure that this is safe, or how can we make sure that we're not inducing bias in these settings? And this is the fundamental question I think we're trying to look at.
I mean, just if I could contribute a thought here. we have to have some way of monitoring the performance of the system after deployment. In medicine, there's the whole adverse reactions or adverse events reporting requirements. Is that right? So I guess I would ask in, say, the advertising world, what's the equivalence of that? And maybe you should provide a way that the end users can report things. So when I see maybe a story in the newspaper about some catastrophe, and next to it is an advertisement for funeral services or something like that, I should flag that and say, this is really in poor taste. This is a failure of the matching. But because I don't know who else can be monitoring that kind of complex thing. Yeah, maybe your company needs a team of people that do random sampling of the context of each advertisement and ask, was this appropriate or not? And maybe they can develop some filters to try to help them find bad cases.
Okay, so sort of a crowdsourced red team.
Right.
I like that idea. Yeah, and yeah, Daniel, thanks for your thoughts. Also, I kind of put you in a spot. I wasn't quite sure that how to. Yeah, basically, I really was thinking that what would be an analogy. So yeah, thanks for taking that question as well. So the next part, I kind of wanted to delve deeper into the aspects of interdisciplinary research, specifically like there has been interdisciplinary work in machine learning in the data community for a while, for a long time. It's nothing new. Even for interdisciplinary research that focuses more on the society has been there in the data for good space as well. So, I mean, as we as a community are working on more trustworthy interdisciplinary research, can we learn from each other, or where can we learn from each other? So, Tom, I was wondering that if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I've certainly done a lot of things in ecology and those kinds of applications. And I think again, Danielle made a really good point with the deep engagement. When you're going to embark on interdisciplinary research, you need to allow quite a lot of time just to learn to understand each other. So I think if we roll back the clock 5 years ago, when lawyers and computer scientists were first starting to talk about things like the criminal justice applications or robotics applications, we didn't understand what the other people were saying. They would use the same words, but they would mean completely different things, right? And so I think in my experience, it can take up to a year before you really have mastered the vocabulary of the other field. And part of that is also, I don't know what it would be like in industry, but in the academic world, you're typically talking about two professors collaborating, and each of them has their own disciplinary needs for publishing papers or getting credit. What counts as a research contribution in one field might not count as a research contribution in the other field. In fact, you can feel very, you can have a lot of anxiety going into a collaboration where you find out, is there any machine learning research to be done here, or is this just an engineering effort? And I think that I encourage people to be patient, because as you engage deeply, I'm sure you will find difficult, computer science, machine learning, AI problems to solve. But the risks are much greater, I think, for a graduate student, because you have a fixed amount of time, and you really, you need to try to get through that, I guess, orientation and problem definition phase. With some sense that you need a backup plan, basically, in case the main idea doesn't go through. Let's see, is there anything else I wanted to say there? I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I think that's something that I've also faced in my own interdisciplinary work as well, is that the solutions, the initial solutions that are good enough that we have come up with, that might not always involve any technical novelty, but then the next phase, the phase where we think that, okay, this model can be better, that actually can spur new technological technical directions that can be worked upon. So basically, one applied project paves the way for another methodological project.
Well, yeah, as an example of that, I was working with people on invasive species management, and we were using reinforcement learning. And of course, initially, we just defined a reward function. But then when we started talking with the end users, they were very reluctant to assign, say, a dollar value to a species going extinct. Like how much is a species worth? And so it seemed that it would be much better to express our objective as minimizing the economic costs subject to a constraint on species extinction, that the probability of extinction should be below 1 in 100 over a 100-year span or something. So then that raises the question of, okay, how do we solve this as a constrained Markov decision process with function approximation, which is still an open problem. So yeah, so I think part of it is, again, listening to the users, and they say, well, I'm having trouble expressing this. And that's when you should say, okay, let's try to, so one of my heuristics is, yeah, whenever you find yourself making an arbitrary decision during engineering, that's a research question. There should be a sound reason for making that decision, not a just let's come up with a guess. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely useful. Thank you so much, Tom. I think this is something, one of the key takeaways that we can take from today's panel. And also, Kush, I wanted to get your thoughts on this specific question as well. We have worked together in the IBM Data for Good space, in IBM Data for Good program. You have been the co-founder of that program. You've been involved in other efforts like DataKind as well. So I was wondering if you had any knowledge or advice to share regarding any knowledge transfer from such other types of interdisciplinary work.
Yeah, I think in a previous panel, we've touched on the project we worked on together with the disease ecology. So let me not go to that one, but just another example. So this was a project I did with DataKind on estimating. There was a partner organization, Simpa Networks, which does pay-as-you-go solar panels for rural villagers in India. And pay-as-you-go means they take a small down payment and then let people repay over a long period of time. And so the machine learning problem was around who would fully repay for their system versus who would not. And the data was not the typical credit scoring sort of data, given that these were rural villagers, and that the task wasn't just general credit, but for solar panels. So anyways, the point that I wanted to make from that example is that this was back around like 2013, 2014 or so, and it was before a lot of the algorithmic fairness sort of stuff was really taking hold in the machine learning community. And we had some features that were I mean, they were predictive actually. So that included the last name of the individual applying. And in that part of India, the last name is a very strong indicator of the religion and the caste of the person. And the question was, I mean, should we or should we not include that as a variable in the predictive model? And it was a very interesting back and forth sort of discussion with with the organization, and even internally, they didn't have a good sense of what to do. So they had their own sort of tech people or whatever, and they were like, anything that helps us get even 2% better accuracy would be great. Whereas the executive director was like, no, this is against our sort of values and so forth. So, I mean, just kind of learning about the real world is, I think, a very critical sort of part of doing machine learning research, because we can think of ourselves somewhat as tool builders, and if you don't know what the tools are going to be used for and how the all the considerations come in, then it really limits the creativity and I mean the true problem formulations that are actually the valuable ones. So yeah, that kind of was one spur for us to go into doing more algorithmic fairness, because just dropping that last name wasn't, I mean, that's what we did, but now looking back, it was probably not the best thing we could have done. We could have tried to mitigate the bias while still keeping the feature in and so forth. So so yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be learned, I think, from just interacting with where your work is actually going to be applied.
Thanks, Kush. And I think you touched upon another invisible elephant, which is that how to make the conversation regarding trust in machine learning systems more or rather less Western-centric, because as we go outside the context of the Western civilization in general, we'll have more and more of these kind of issues, which are like very, 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 very specific to the context and the population being analyzed in general. So yeah, thanks for sharing your experience on that front. So for the next part, I want to talk the second last question actually for this panel before we roll on to audience questions is how to kind of do inter-data disciplinary research, which is that there are a lot of data-centric fields. There is data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, statistics, probability, applied mathematics. And so how do we make this conversation broader than just trustworthy machine learning? Why not trustworthy data learning or something like that? And I do feel sort of being an outsider myself, my own background is in statistics, 100%, that we could do better as a community, and that would actually help us as a community. So I'm going to ask Danielle first regarding her thoughts, because Danielle, I know that you also have background and expertise in statistics as well. That if you could offer any advice as to how to approach this inter-data disciplinary research and specifically on trustworthy machine learning, if you would.
Yeah, I think this is an important question and an interesting question. So anything we do with data, once we bring data into the picture, we're doing data science. So whether we're running machine learning or statistical algorithms, it is data science. I think there are a few nuances with doing interdisciplinary research in different fields. So I can talk about the healthcare field, where so firstly, healthcare is extremely regulated. If you have patient data, that data is very regulated. So I think this is a building block for trust in algorithms, that there are metrics of compliance. So GDPR, HIPAA. I think it's probably one of the most regulated fields in terms of data, if not the most regulated field in terms of data. So access to healthcare data is very restricted, and it's aimed at protecting the person, protecting their information and their health status. So I think this is these regulations are really good, because then they ensure that it's a baseline for ensuring preserving of privacy. And this is really important. I think for interdisciplinary research, there is this question of sometimes when you're doing interdisciplinary research, you have to be prepared to be the engineer and also to be the statistician and the machine learning researcher as well. So it's very hard to see where one begins and one ends. And to me, interdisciplinary research as a machine learning researcher is all about teamwork. It's almost like working in a startup where you have someone with a particular role, but you have to take different hats. You have to learn about the ethics, you have to do all the compliance training, you have to do the engineering and come up with the algorithm as well. So I think this exercise is actually really formative because it really inserts us in that domain and helps us to have longer term impact. And that longer term impact also has implications for we are going to build trustworthy systems because we're more involved with the process and we're more engaged with what are the implications, what is happening to the end user as well. So and I think this is very, as a statistician, I'm sure you know, this is very normalized in the statistical field, where the baseline for a statistician is that you say you don't start any study without having a statistician at the beginning. So I think also with machine learning, it's really important to get into the process as early as possible and help to build up that process as well. That we need to be not just appendages to, we have the data, and therefore we're going to do something with the data, but we need to be in the process, if possible, of collecting that data, of understanding how that data is generated, and also thinking with the view of thinking, what is the end goal of that data? What is the end goals of what we're trying to achieve? And this helps us to build more trustworthy systems. Just as a process itself, it's true, we should think about it explicitly. How are we going to build systems that are trustworthy and deploy models that are trustworthy? But also being part of that initial process as well, it helps us to also interrogate those systems as well.
Thanks, Daniel. And I'm glad that you emphasize the importance of teamwork and also kind of the startup-ish environment that we often have to work on when working in interdisciplinary project, and being the only data person basically in the whole project who can code up algorithms. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So yeah, Tom, I was also interested in hearing your thought as well, and specifically because you're on the other part of the spectrum. You come from the CS background, a CS background, but has collaborated extensively with statistics researchers and interdisciplinary researchers as well.
Right. Well, I think I to some extent, you know, we in computer science, we need to become better applied mathematicians, better statisticians, right? So you know, I have all of my students take a series of courses in statistics, but of course you can't become deep. You can't achieve deep knowledge in all parts of the intellectual space, and so I think. You know, I've been told this slogan in the past that you should never cross disciplinary lines unescorted. So, which really means you need to collaborate with a statistician or collaborate with an applied mathematician and so on. And so one model in the academic setting, I recently had a student, Su Liu, who did her PhD in statistics, but jointly supervised by me and by a professor in statistics. So. And we're seeing, at least in academic world, often now joint appointments between computer science and statistics. So in some sense, those fields may be merging. And of course, we see lots of data science programs that involve both. And Carnegie Mellon has the Department of Machine Learning, which is 50-50 between statistics and computer science. So, I would guess it's a mix of you know, collaboration across the lines, and also maybe merging in the particular case of statistics and machine learning.
Thanks, Tom. And I think many of us are going to take that phrase to heart: never cross disciplinary lines unescorted. So yeah, thanks for proposing that as well. So since we are running a little bit out of time, I'm going to roll into the last question. And I'd request our panelists to kind of answer briefly that in the coming few years, what aspect of trustworthiness, be it fairness, transparency, explainability, robustness, safety even, do you think is most needed in an interdisciplinary project or in an interdisciplinary approach to use cases in general? So Tom, I'll start with you.
Well, yeah, I think we always need to be thinking in cross-disciplinary ways. I think that we've still been examining trustworthiness kind of in the small. And there are so many, I think of them as the downstream aspects of applications, because I'm more engaged in algorithm design and development of techniques. But what I think is we need to be collaborating downstream to understand what are the technical hooks or knobs that we could give the HCI people and the lawyers and the sociologists and so on that would make our systems more useful to them. So yeah.
Okay, thanks Tom for stressing on the HCI part more. Kush, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think related to what I was saying before, I think the intermingling of these pillars of trust is where we're headed. I mean, one thing we were just, documenting recently is, let's say that you have a logistic regression with a discrimination-aware regularizer, and you have a logistic regression which has like Boolean rules as potential features, and also you have logistic regression with noise added for differential privacy, and they're all in different tools. And now you have a system where you want all three. You want explainability, fairness, and privacy. So from the tooling perspective, you kind of have to make a choice given the way things exist right now. Do you take one versus the other? But I think we need to kind of be in a position where we can have all of those options available to us, and kind of be able to mix and match and kind of do the right thing for developers, for practitioners, and so forth, and kind of give them the guidance of what is the way that they need to proceed, because it's such a vast space that even all of us don't fully understand it. So how can we expect the practitioners in different industries to do so?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So Daniel, what would you add to the discourse on the important aspect?
These are really important, I think, points. I guess one thing that if I had a wish list for developing trustworthy ML systems, something that's been talked about earlier in the panel as well, I'd like to see this panel happen in a non-Western context. A lot of these dialogues happen in the US and Europe, in Western societies. I just wish that there was a way of opening up the conversation and having those conversations initiated in other continents, in Africa, in Australia, in Asia as well. And I think this is really important for building systems that are really trustworthy and that are universal as well, that we have algorithmic development in these contexts. And we also talk about what is trustworthy ML in these contexts as well. And that's why I'm such a fan of initiatives such as KIPU, which is increasing participation of machine learning in Latin America, or you have Data Science Africa. The way they frame problems in different parts of the world is very different. So I think it's really important to bring these dialogues to the forefront as well.
Okay, that was actually really useful and interesting, Daniel. And thanks for reinforcing the point about the conversation being more less Western-centric rather. And I think that would, if we had a panel with domain experts, or rather community experts from non-Western communities, and also maybe professors from, suppose, a university from Japan, I think we'd have had a very different conversation regarding the state of the art and what are the needs of the field. So yeah, I think definitely that's something we should be aiming for as well. We should be aiming for more as well. So thank you for bringing that up. And I see that Tom has answered all the questions in the Q&A already. So Tom, I can't thank you enough for those. And since we are already over time, I'd kind of bring this panel to an end here. Thanks everyone for joining, and above all, thank you so much, Daniel, Tom, Kush, for joining us. It has been a very much fruitful discussion. A lot of interesting points have come up. In addition to the point that, oh, we should collaborate more, or CS people should collaborate more with people from social sciences, etc., etc. And yeah, I think we have definitely touched upon some of the invisible elephants we were wanting to address, them being present. So yeah, and that happened organically, which I'm very glad about. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks again, Daniel, Tom, Kush. Thanks to our partners in Montreal AI. Abhishek is going to take over soon after the break. Thank you all to the audience members, to all the audience members. Do stick around for lots more interesting things that are about to come up soon. That's me signing off. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for a great panel so far. It was fantastic. Thank you, Heather. Really appreciate that. We'll be starting with the town hall in about 3 minutes from now. We already have Stella on the screen there, and hopefully we'll have Christian and Krishnaram join us on the stage, the virtual stage as well very soon, and we'll get started. We've got an exciting format for all of you today, so well, stay tuned. I'll talk to you in a couple of minutes. Hey, Kristen, we'll be starting in a minute. Hey, Krishnaram.
Hello.
Hey
Yeah, how are
Abhishek.
you?
Hey Christian. Hey Stella. Hey everyone.
Hello.
Stella, Krishna.
Yeah, we're trying to be, I know it's the middle of the workday for everybody, myself included. So, we'll be on time, we'll end on time so that we can all go back to everything else that we were doing. It's the end, we're pulling up to the end of the week. So it's always a little busy. All right. Yeah, so we're half a minute past noon Eastern. For those of you joining us in Eastern, happy afternoon. For the rest of the world, the appropriate greeting, morning, evening. Nice to have all of you join in. We had a fantastic panel already so far. Got to learn a lot about what interdisciplinary approaches can look like when we're thinking about trustworthy ML. This session in particular, we're very excited about the Trustworthy ML folks and the Montreal AI Ethics Institute. We wanted to try something different. We wanted to give basically everybody an opportunity to have access to experts, and I'll introduce all of them in a second, who have deep applied experience in the space of AI, but specifically in the space of applying trustworthy ML techniques, responsible AI techniques in work that touches on systems that are in production, touching the lives of millions of people, large-scale systems. So this is the time where we encourage all of us, all of the people who are joining in, whether through YouTube or here on Zoom, to ask your questions, because this is a town hall, meaning that for the most part, we'll be relying on you guys to provide questions, to ask your questions, ask your hard questions, really the ones that you would not have a chance to, I see Kristen nodding. We'll try our best to answer the questions based on our experiences. And of course, where we don't know the answer, we also rely on our community to provide us with promising avenues to go and pursue answers for that. So that's essentially, there isn't that much more to say about the format of the session. It's a town hall, so really I would encourage people to drop in your questions in the, if you're on Zoom, in the Q&A section of Zoom, or if you're on YouTube, drop them in the YouTube comments, and the lovely team will filter those, and I'll have access and I'll field them to our panelists. Give me 1 second here. And hopefully folks are able to see my screen. I would imagine so. After so many virtual meetings, hopefully this all works. So we have with us today, as I said, practitioners with deep experience. We have with us Stella from Eluther AI. So Stella is a mathematician, a theoretical computer science scientist who specializes in the design and analysis of algorithms. Stella works at Booz Allen Hamilton, working with computational social science researchers to develop new models and algorithms to support their work. I've had the pleasure of being on panels with Stella before, always fascinating insights. So I'm really excited for what she brings to the discussion today. And of note is the work that Stella leads at Eluther AI, which is a research collective and online distributed research group that works on open source AI research, and their flagship project is the GPT-Neo family of models. It's designed to replicate and build models that are similar to the ones from OpenAI, such as GPT-3. We're joined by Christian today from Facebook. He's also someone I really admire. I've seen him speak before about his work on the AI red team at Facebook. He has very practical insights on this subject of applying some of these trustworthy ML ideas in practice to systems on scale. His research interests lie in the field of computer vision and adversarial machine learning, hence the AI red team. One of the things that's very interesting is that his work, of course, being at Facebook, touches on misinformation, election interference, those kinds of things as it relates to the platform. And he's managed teams related to the detection of objectionable and harmful content. And he had worked at MSR before that, and has received degrees from EPFL and the University of Catalonia in Barcelona. And finally, we also have Krishnaram with us from Amazon. where again, he works on these problems at a very large scale on the Amazon AI platform. So anyone who's used some of the capabilities, the AI capabilities from Amazon, you probably touched on or interacted with some of the work that Krishnaram has done. He's led similar efforts at LinkedIn before and was a part of Microsoft's Ether board, which is a fantastic group of people. Me being at Microsoft, I know the deep expertise that we have there, and I can only imagine all the work that Krishnaram did there as well. As you can see, he's led work on privacy within the LinkedIn salary product, among some of the other things that relate to the application of trustworthy ML principles to large-scale products. So that's who we have with us today. A fantastic group of panelists, and hopefully, for those who are, again, to reiterate the format, it's a town hall. Please filter in or share your questions either on the Zoom Q&A tool or through YouTube in the comments. I will kickstart us with a question so that we get going, and then hopefully that gives people inspiration to chime in with their own questions. Maybe Stella, since we already have you off mute, I'll start with you, and then Krishnaram and Kristen, please feel free to chime in. So what's the biggest deployment challenge you've faced in responsible AI in the last 3 months?
I would say that the biggest challenge that I typically face when it comes to deploying responsible AI techniques is getting investment from the people who are developing models, the people who are going to be using models. I feel that there's an unfortunate extent to which, like, trustworthy or ethical AI has, as I sometimes like to jokingly say, already lost the war. Like, there are a huge amount of deployments of AI models and techniques that are doing a lot of harm in the world today and are not really receiving any kind of oversight, any kind of validation, any kind of critical examination. And there's a large group of people who kind of just accept that as the default. And in my experience, oftentimes when you bring up questions like this, the first response is like, why should I care? Like, you know, how does this actually produce benefits, especially when you're working in a corporate context, you know, companies being highly concerned about their bottom line, companies being, and just getting kind of an initial buy-in and getting people to agree, like, yes, this is something that we need to be devoting resources to, is, in my experience, often the largest hurdle.
If I can interject, I can add on the top of what Stella said here. I agree with you. One big challenge when deploying systems at any scale, I would say, like at Facebook scale, Amazon, or even smaller, is making sure people understand what are the trade-offs between, like, you're putting a system in production, what are the benefits, and what are the shortcomings that system might come. And also getting buy-in from them to mitigate, or to even worse, or even harder, to pre-mitigate that. Hey, we found so just like speaking from my side, working on a red team, you try to identify vulnerabilities, and you have to say, like, out of all the ominous horizon futures that you might hit, you should be taking care of these few things. And a lot of my energy personally goes into convincing people why this is important. Sometimes the question is like, why should I fix it? Has never happened. And some of part of my job is like to convince them. And that brings me like this conviction part, it comes to like trying to speak the same language about risk. What is going to happen? Why should this be important to you? And there's like this last mile customer service with each team on like convincing them with their own argument and their own language. And you should fix at least that. Or even if you cannot fix something, at least have a playbook on saying, like, if this happens, these are the 10 things you should pay attention at the moment. Because of course you have like a finite number of resources and you want to hit some production goals, and you cannot put all the eggs into just the basket of prevention. you want to make a healthy balance of that. Covering all the bases, that's what it's, at least for the kind of scope I have, is the most challenging one. Just making sure I speak and convince in the same language that my counterparts want to hear.
Thanks, Stella and Christine. I agree with, I think all that was just said. So if I may add something, I think perhaps Stella and Christine are referring to even incentives, right? Like how do we create the right incentives? This can be at different levels. This can be first at the level of the company or even industry level, right? At the organization level. How do we incentivize companies to take, say, whether it's bias or privacy or right, robustness, security seriously? So kind of sometimes I tend to draw parallels with the way security was perceived, let's say 10 or 15 years back, when it was largely reactionary. Like once we saw more and more of, say, data breaches or other kinds of issues, like now companies take security very seriously. There is pen testing for security. Like along similar lines, we need to create the incentives so that all organizations, not only like large companies, but medium-sized or small companies across all industries, do pen testing for bias, for any privacy leakages, for any adversarial examples and so forth beforehand. So that's kind of like, there are different ways of achieving those incentives. I think, of course, the regulations would be a direction that can kind of create the right incentives. I think so being part of the Amazon's AWS machine learning services team, like when we speak to customers, often I emphasize the following. So customers may ask, why should I care about, say, checking for bias and so forth? Like the reason, in my view, is that it has become relatively easier for, say, even people outside the organization to identify biases in the services offered by an organization. So this is quite evident in the case of, say, online services, right? Like facial analysis or similar kind of services. It's fairly evident, and thankfully that's what, thanks to the great research started by Timnit and Joy and others. So we are now at a position where for some of these technologies there is like enough oversight. But the point we make is that even if you take things which may not be directly online, let's take, say, the recent credit card issues that Apple ran into. If somebody is really determined, it's possible to test such products or services, even if it takes some kind of like maybe real world applying for a credit card, seeing, or applying for an increase in the loan amount and seeing what's the output for different people with same background, people with same kind of qualifications, but maybe different demographic backgrounds. So I think that's kind of one. Along similar lines, at the moment, I see that these incentives are more aligned in some dimensions compared to others. For example, if you think of explainability or model monitoring in general, the incentives are fully aligned. It's in the best interest of an organization, even without any regulations, to make sure that the data scientists can debug their models, or the models don't degrade in performance over time and so forth. We need to create similar incentives for privacy and bias. I think that's kind of at least something that I've seen. The other challenge, if I may add, is that often if you look at bias or fairness, a large amount of literature and focus is on understanding biases before model training, in the training data, or once the model is trained in terms of how the model performs. But I think it's equally important, at least as important, or if not more, to monitor once the model is deployed, because due to changes in real world conditions, even if the model was pen tested or stress tested for bias, it can develop biases over time, or we may not be aware of all dimensions of biases, as we see again and again with, say, large language models and other types of relatively complex AI systems.
Thank you for thank you for sharing that, Krishna. I think those are all very valid points. And Kristen, I see you unmuted yourself, Kristen. You want to chime in? No.
I just wanted to a small remark on top of what you said, Krishna. Definitely, I think you cover all the spectrum of responsible AI aspects here. one thing that is it resonates with me, like you mentioned, like 50 years ago, people started to realize what was the importance of doing like pen testing or more like robustness and security of systems. I think we also have to keep in mind that less than 10 years ago, I mean, like 5-7 years ago, AI was not even working. It was like I don't know, for the old timers, it was rules, random forests, SVMs are like work partially. Like when this explosion of AI in deep learning and this revolution, it moved very fast, everything. So we were from 0 to 100 in a very short period of time. The mindset of security, of bias exploration, of making systems robust, it's something that had to develop in parallel with this revolution. And of course, like the allocation of resources, it's uneven, because at the beginning, everyone wanted to make sure that AI was something that they could use for something valuable. I think this disparity in resources and effort is what we need to gap right now. That's why like there's much more work to be done right now, because this revolution happened very, very, very fast. And that's what we're here discussing. But definitely more work on bias and robustness and every aspect of responsible AI. It's probably one of the most promising areas of research, at least to me, in the upcoming years.
Definitely. I also, since we brought up the subject of bias quite extensively, Krishna, and the subject of large language models, I know Stella's work basically revolves around that, from morning to evening. And I would love to hear, especially on the work that you did with the PILE a data set that Eleuther curated and created. And would love to know a bit more about that, and any other reflections you have based on the comments that both Kristen and Krishnaram made. Oh, did I cut off? No. Could you guys hear me? Yeah, Stella? I think
Sorry, I think I was having
still
internet issues on my end. I heard part of that question. You wanted to hear about bias in large language models?
Well, large language models and the PILE data set that Eleuther AI co-created, curated, and the lessons from that, because that was something I think that we went beyond the Common Crawl and the other sources, combining all of that together. What were some lessons, things that people could learn from that?
Okay, that's a complicated question. So just for a little bit of background, if anyone's not familiar, one of my recent research projects, I guess it's not so recent, was released 300 days ago. But one of my somewhat recent research projects was developing a large curated data set for training language models on. At the time it was released, the only 100 billion parameter or larger language model that existed was GTP3, or that was publicly discussed was GTP3. And there weren't really any adequate data sets for training similar models. OpenAI went and created their own that really didn't particularly resemble other data sets, and they didn't share this data set with the public. So a team at Eleuther AI, led by myself and Leo Gao, went and basically tried to create a good data set for training language models on. And we narrowed it down a bit. We focused only on English. And it's, and so that's kind of what the PILE is. Since its release, it's been used a lot. Microsoft's recent 300, 500, forget exactly how big it is, but the Microsoft and NVIDIA joint effort that set the record for the new largest language model was trained on the PILE, which was really cool, or an updated version of it. So yeah, I mean, we learned a lot working on that. At a high level, what we did was we wanted to break away from the, at the time, dominant paradigm of focusing on large-scale data scrapes. Large-scale data scrapes can be useful, but there is just so much text on the internet that I've generally found that using things like Common Crawl is not necessary to obtain the amount of documents that you need and the amount of text that you need to train these large models on. common crawl data is extremely messy. It's extremely noisy. It's extremely low quality. I'm part of an interdisciplinary effort and multinational effort called the Big Science Research Workshop right now. That's training some large language models. And one of the things that we encountered when trying to train a 100 billion parameter model on Oscar was we found that there was this place where the loss exploded. And we went and we looked at it, and there were 200 million consecutive backslashes, just like in the data set. Yeah, so I really think that there's a strong reliance on like these massive data scrapes, like Oscar, like Common Crawl. And I think that one of the biggest lessons we learned from doing the pile was that that's not really necessary. There's a lot of text that's been produced by organizations that is recordings of specific things, and you can afford to, in fact, go and curate what you're including. So we made a list of places that we felt were worthwhile to include. So we went and we scraped archive, and we went and we scraped, and we took the Project Gutenberg, which is a large open data set of open access books. And we, instead of going and trying to download, just the internet writ large and then clean it, we decided that we really wanted to pick things that we thought were going to be high quality and start with them. And I think that that was probably one of, if not the most important things we did from a data quality and kind of lessons learned point of view, that you can afford to do that. And you can afford to do that from a bias point of view. If you are looking at data sets and you're like, I don't think that the average Reddit comment is going to be, of whatever ethical measures you have or whatnot to suit my needs, like, just go ahead and don't use it. You can do that. Go find other data, because there is so much data out there that you can afford to pick and choose on a source level. And I really don't think enough people do that.
That's great to hear, Stella, because I think that's a huge problem and maybe self-imposed impediment, right? Where we've sort of boxed ourselves in towards thinking a particular way about how we go about tackling this stuff. So I really appreciate that perspective, and especially given the work that you do and how all of it is open source and everybody can go and take a look at it. That's it's much appreciated. I want to switch gears and bring us to some questions that have already started filtering in. The top voted question at the moment is from Daniel, and it says, how do you handle the tension between trying to make AI more safe, fair, ethical, and robust, working in an industry that prioritizes profit and power? How do you make a difference and avoid mere ethics washing? So I think the concern is maybe trying to distinguish between efforts that are mainly for PR purposes or trying to showcase whether, I see Stella's volunteer to answer that. So yeah, please start, and then Christian and Krishnaram, would love to hear from you as well.
Oh, I didn't intend to volunteer. I'm not sure what I clicked on that volunteered me to answer that.
Oh, okay. It says that
deliberate. I can talk, but I want to let maybe one of the other panelists take a first shot.
Christian, yeah.
I can take the lead on that. So definitely, I think the question has some bias in it. It's like, it's not that corporations will only take profit and like not pay attention to ethics or responsible AI. So at Facebook we have a very large team that goes very deep into what are the needs for models put in production to make sure they're doing the right thing. Of course, like there's hundreds of thousands of models put outside, but that's an important effort. First of all, we want to have mechanisms that we can measure biases. We have people working on that. We have to make sure, understand what are the trade-offs. Are we sure we want to put that model in production? What are the threats that might be coming if we put that? So this is something that is considered. It's a never-ending work. Like, just to be honest, like, no matter how much you work, the space of doing the right thing is huge, is unbounded. It's like, because bias are going to creep there no matter what. By definition of any statistical system, whatever test data, training data you put in there and tracing data, it's going to have some biases. And you cannot say like, well, I got my recipe, all my models are right. So we have to keep investing into that. That's something that we do a lot at Facebook. Sometimes people like will criticize us. Absolutely. That's part of the ecosystem. You need to have critics that tells you like, hey, you are not doing enough into this front. You should pay attention to that. So we are a limited amount of engineers working and having keeping ethics and doing the right thing very close at heart. That's something that I wake every morning, like that's why I'm here working in this company. But we need critics. It's important. We need people to tell us like, hey, you should be doing more of that. You should pay attention to that. Being deaf to that, this is totally like counterproductive. So that's why like in this kind of forums, like, please tell us what is missing. What do you think we should not be doing? That's just like piggybacking on the top of what you said, Stella, before. Even we are building data sets at Facebook. Like we had one that my team put recently, casual conversations on having the largest data set with different skin tone, different genders, different backgrounds, different everything, just to make sure that people could tell, based on your data set, this is the gaps that you have. Trying to find like common measures across the industry to say, where are the gaps where you should be putting? We do not want to be deaf. Definitely we need people like researchers, external people, especially like we don't want to be blindsided, because you might have like blind spot, because by working all the time on the same problem, we might be missing things. That is the part that we need to do. But at the end, the TLDR for me is not that companies will put profit in front of doing the right thing. That's not correct. I mean, people like myself and my colleagues and my org have very strong voices within the companies like, this is something we should change. We should be doing that differently. And we are heard and change happen. Of course, I cannot comment on everything. But definitely, that's what keeps me going to work every day, trying to do the right thing. And definitely, I'm expecting everyone in the community to be critic, to tell us what should we do better. That's how we can at least listen, introspect, and do something more. I want to hear your thoughts on that, Christian, also coming from another corporation point of view.
Yeah, sure. I can add on that. I think there are a few thoughts I had. So one is that, as I was kind of alluding early on, creating the right incentives is, of course, very important. And I think one type of incentives could be, say, regulations. The other type of incentives are more of, say, enough oversight, right? Like if you take the services that we offer from AWS on machine learning, whether it is various AI services or the machine learning services like SageMaker, our reasoning is that it's in our best interest to stress test these services ourselves before it gets discovered through external oversight, right? In the past, that has been the way things have evolved, is that from academic research, the issues were identified, but at least there is now a realization that it's in our best interest to stress test ourselves and identify issues and fix them beforehand, before they get discovered outside. That said, as Christian mentioned, it's still important to have external oversight, because there may be some dimensions that we may not be thinking of. I think that kind of leads to a broader dimension. Like, this is a reason why it's very important to have, say, diversity in the team, so that we don't miss out on some dimensions. Like, so when I first learned about the work by Timnit and Joy about 3 years back, back then I was at LinkedIn, and my first thought was, would I have even thought of this problem? And if I ask myself honestly, the answer is no, because I may not have experienced this issue firsthand. Right? I think that's another reason why it's very important to have diversity in terms of demographic backgrounds, in terms of lived experiences, and so forth in the teams, so that we are not blind to just our own experience. That's one. The other part I wanted to say about being part of ourselves in a slightly different position, or in a way which is kind of at least to some extent aligned with the spirit of this question. We are attempting to offer what customers are asking us, and so long as it's not just on us alone, but so long as customers ask more about, say, understanding bias or explaining or adversarial robustness and so forth, we will be prioritizing that. So kind of from that angle, I think the more customers demand this, we will be prioritizing even more. And even without that, even in the absence of that, I think the spirit of the question is that we should be doing this so that our services, right, like are not suffering from biases or privacy issues or other dimensions.
Do you guys really feel that you don't get pushback for trying to do ethical work? That there aren't profit incentives that you don't go to people and say, oh, it's the thing we should be doing is XYZ, and you kind of get blown off like that? That's just not something either you have experience working for large tech companies.
So I can kind of just comment on that, especially like reflecting on my experience while at LinkedIn, where we were working on representative ranking for LinkedIn talent search and kind of diversity in ranking. I think that was an instance where, from a machine learning angle, we were interested in understanding about fairness in ranking of candidates for recruiter search and so forth. At the same time, from the business angle, we saw alignment. The LinkedIn's customers were asking LinkedIn, how can LinkedIn help improve the diversity of their workforce? So I think that's relatively, I would say, maybe a rare instance where there was alignment from both business or product as well as from as a machine learning researchers, what we wanted. I think that may not be true in all cases, as Stella alluded to. The challenge is that let's take the perspective of, let's say, a data scientist or a machine learning engineer. How are they getting incentivized? Are they getting incentivized when they maybe add a new feature and deploy that in production, or are they getting incentivized if they find out about biases in the systems? I think it starts even from there. It's very important for organizations to make sure that this incentive structure, right, from all the way from the very top to the people who are actually doing the real work, the incentives are aligned. To going specifically to what Stella asked, I wouldn't say that it's always the case that things are fully aligned, but I think that's why we need incentives and mechanisms to create more alignment.
So another thought on that. So I think, first of all, like getting pushback to do the right thing consciously, I never got. Like, yeah, you must put the model that you will know it's bias out there. I mean, we don't get that. That's not the kind of question, because I could imply that you are wrongdoing by knowing it. So I would say, like, I resonate with what Krishnan said today here, is the process of development and the process of finding robustness and fairness and whatnot, it's pretty much intertwined. And it boils down to the incentives that you give engineers on how you build the systems, but also it boils down to the tooling that you have to make conscious decisions through the design process. Because you could say, I want to have technology that allows me to understand what are my biases while I am developing my system. You don't want like to do that on the later on. So somewhere we did is like trying to build technology to assess adversarial robustness for systems at scale while you are developing them. At least you can take informed decisions on what are the trade-offs and what you want to allow more, what you want to allow less, or what you want to fix before, or what you want to have a playbook for in the future. But I think it all boils down to having the right tooling, the right incentives, and also the right mitigation strategies, because no matter what you do, your system will have biases somewhere. So you want to fix that proactively as much as you can, but you don't want to get into like a perfection immobility where like, I'm not going to ship something unless I have explored every possible thing that could go wrong, because that you might never ship anything. There's like some conscious traders and conscious understanding you have to do before you ship. But definitely reward incentives, making sure that everyone is aligned with the mission. And if there's any pushback, because that might happen, try to understand what is the root cause and try to understand what is the potential outcomes if this goes. And definitely, I'm sure in any company, we have review processes when you ship something to make sure this gets recorded, that this is agreed, that it's not just a single person decision. I mean, we have that at Facebook. I'm sure it's in every other company, just to make sure that this is the right thing. What are the decisions that we are taking, and how we're going to fix them in the future or mitigate them if they happen?
Well, okay. So, I mean, so kind of to speak, Daniel, to your question based on my experiences directly, I have had that experience that there are a lot of hurdles to getting ethical work actually done, and that there are a lot of people, especially senior people at companies, that value various other things as more of a priority. One of the things that I tend to lean on in terms of making real differences is, first of all, finding so earlier, I think it was Christian mentioned, framing things in the language of the people you're working with. If people's primary concern is about profits, in your example, you can go to them and you can talk about risk. You can talk about the fact that there's bad PR associated with doing unethical things. There is legal risk, and that's kind of one way that I have brought people around to being more interested in paying attention to these kinds of concerns. Another thing is that, this depends a lot on your company, but if you can work small steps into products without really making a huge big fuss about it, and you can just, if you find yourself in a position of relative power in a group of developers, just saying, like, this is how, this is what I think the best practices are, this is how I think we should be going about doing this, and just making it kind of the default the default action, and then you get to avoid kind of those arguments about profits versus ethics or whatnot.
Definitely, and I think that's a great discussion, because that's one of the questions that always comes up with any work that's related in or that's being done at a large corporation when it comes to ethical AI, and it's great to hear all of your perspectives on that. I see Krishna, you have volunteered to answer Amir's question, so I'll let you take it away for concept drift detection and prevention.
Sure. So I think let me just repeat the question for those listening on live stream. So Amir asks, what methods and systems do you see being used in practice for concept drift detection and prevention? So I think the reference is perhaps to, once a model is deployed, how do we monitor model, right? What are the dimensions along which we want to monitor the model? And one of those dimensions is on concept drift. There could be data drift. First of all, it's important to monitor for data drift when say the distribution of the data changes. There are a variety of techniques to monitor such distributional differences. There are techniques like MMD. There are techniques which look into maybe keeping snapshots of the data and monitoring whether there is a difference in distribution and so forth. So concept drift is looking at not just the changes in the distribution of the features, but also perhaps the change in the distribution of the target variable. This can happen often in extremely adversarial settings. Let's take fraud prevention or detection, for instance. Suppose we have built a model which uses a set of features to decide whether some activity is fraudulent or not. The natural reaction of the fraudsters would be to adapt their attacks based on these differences. So as a result, the relationship between the target variable and the features can very quickly change. And again, I think there are different techniques to detect this. Looking at the combined distribution would be one. I'm sure there are other techniques as well. So instead of going into the technical specifics, I just want to comment on kind of recent observation that I noticed. So if you take, say, detecting drift in the model quality, or even detecting drift in bias, it's often important to have ground truth labels. Like if you want to understand whether the model is degrading over time, one way to find that is maybe keep measuring precision or recall or other metrics associated with the model over time. And in many cases, this may be a little bit difficult because we may not have labels right away. Either the labels are getting delayed, or we may need to get the labels from human judgment, which may also have some lag. So one way which could be a proxy for such model degradation is monitoring whether the important features are changing over time. So by this, what I mean is there are various explanation techniques for understanding what are the important features, what is the attribution of each features. Often it's the case that when the model starts degrading due to maybe data drift or concept drift, the features that become important for the model prediction can keep changing. So by monitoring which features are remaining important for the model's prediction, we may get some signal as to maybe whether the model is degrading over time. And then this could be the first layer where we can detect something abnormally happening, and then we can go and see whether get labels and see whether the model is degrading as well. I think there are many systems which are being used for such a detection. For example, as part of Amazon's SageMaker, which is a machine learning service for all aspects of the machine learning pipeline, we have a functionality called Model Monitor, which addresses 4 types of detection. So one is data drift, the second is concept or model drift, the third is drift in explanations, and the fourth is drift in bias, whether the model is developing bias over time. I'm sure there are several other similar systems as well offered by Google Cloud, Azure ML, as well as several open source packages.
So I can add something here. In the context of deepfake detection, that was an area I used to work very recently. So we had a similar issue, you could see that new techniques to generate manipulated media were emerging in a very rapid fashion, and whatever classifier that you could build might be rendered obsolete very quickly. So one of it's not only important to find out if there's some drift or your classifier starts to degrade, but it's also how do you incorporate this new information into your training loop in a matter of days, hours, minutes, if possible. And that's why there's a lot of very interesting one official learning techniques that allows you to update your classifiers to cope with these changes in your distribution, especially for highly adversarial spaces. And also another fascinating area to make sure that you are up to everything, especially for detecting biases or adversarial robustness or whatnot, is early warning systems. Make sure that you can detect emerging pockets of anomalies, even at low volume, and that can hint you that something is happening somewhere or somehow, and how you can monitor to see that that's a spurious thing, that's I don't know, something weird in the manifold that should not be paying attention, or this is indeed something that is emerging, so that you can prevent things from happening before they fester. So having that in conjunction with systems that detect when the concept is drifting allows you to build very powerful systems that at least can cope with some of the problems that we've mentioned on biases that might come from seasonality or any other type, or I don't know, something happening in the world that changes how the data is perceived or presented to you, or any other thing happening. So I think these are also areas of research that now and in the future will benefit a lot in this space of doing responsible AI.
Absolutely, Kristen, and thank you both for sharing that. I think that's very important, especially when we're talking about if the model itself is rigid and not adaptive. I think it just exacerbates some of those concerns because we're not being flexible enough to accommodate the changing state of the external world, which the models are supposed to serve in the first place. And thank you to Stella for answering Heather's question asynchronously. I don't know, Stella, if you want to reply to Heather's reply there, or if we want to move on from that to, because we have another open question, so I'd also love to get to that.
Oh, I thought I had sent her a private message. Apparently I hadn't. So Heather had asked about extending interdisciplinary frameworks. Sorry, I'm not familiar with the acronym PETs. What precisely are you referring to there?
I think it stands for privacy enhancing technologies. So
yeah,
right. Gotcha. Yeah. So I mean, there is okay, I don't totally understand how that relates to the original question then. But I think privacy enhancing technologies are awesome. I think that there has been a reluctance to work, that there hasn't been a lot of work in this field directly on machine learning models for a variety of reasons, including perverse incentives, kind of as you mentioned, as well as simply because what is mainstream in like the computer security world and theoretical computer science world, where a lot of this concern about differential privacy and stuff like this originates, is somewhat disconnected from the things that machine learning researchers pay attention to. But it's a really growing area. There was a great paper that came out this morning, actually, that I probably shouldn't just try to go find right now, but there was a great paper that came out this morning that I will have sent out in some form later when I can find it, about differential privacy in machine learning models. And privacy enhancing technology is important. It's slow to get there, but I'm pretty optimistic about it, as well as its use by people to kind of enhance their own personal privacy independent of the choices of tech companies.
So if I can just add on to Stella's comment, as Stella mentioned, if you look at the world of privacy, the notion of this rigorous notion of differential privacy is getting more and more traction and getting the broad acceptance in the community. The challenge we see with say even differential privacy is that how do we communicate the technical notions like parameters like epsilon or delta to customers with a variety of different levels of technical background. For example, when we want to, there are even taking a step back. I think if you take different privacy, for instance, even communicating this idea that just because we have trained a machine learning model and we have achieved generalization, that does not mean that the model would not encode private information from training data. I think this fact itself is not kind of well understood. So even educating often customers about this becomes the very first step. There have been several recent instances, including back in December, there was a paper showing that if you train a GPT-2 model on just training data, the model may often encode some of the sensitive information like addresses or phone numbers, credit card numbers, and so forth. And similar attacks have been known in many other domains, from social networks to health records, movie recommendations, and so forth. I think that's one part of the problem, like making customers aware that this is a challenge. The second part is that once they are aware of this challenge, how do we communicate the notions like epsilon, right? How do we communicate these notions like what is the level of privacy desired versus what is the resulting effect on accuracy of the model? How to kind of communicate the trade-off between privacy parameters and accuracy in a way that not only say data scientists can understand, but also maybe the legal teams or people with non-technical background can understand. I think that's definitely one of the challenges that we need to work on. And kind of this touches a little bit on another question about the differences in the challenges between academia and industry. I see that some differences are around not only developing techniques, but how do we offer these techniques in an applied or industry context? How do we provide the right user interfaces, or how do we provide the right level of say granularity of details, so that the techniques or the methods appeal to audience with different levels of background? I think these are some of the challenges that we see in practice. And specifically with regard to machine learning lifecycle, I think this emerging notion of machine learning operations of ML ops is something that we see more and more in practice. And this includes not only like say labeling data sets or training models, but also deploying monitoring models and also the feedback afterwards, right? Based on any issues observed during monitoring, how do we then go back and maybe collect more data, more training data, or fix issues in the data, and then redo the whole process. I think there's definitely a desire for more academic research looking at this whole pipeline holistically.
Let me add a couple of things here. I'm going to refer again to that paradigm I mentioned before, that like the revolution of AI has happened in a very short period of time. There's like a lot of people from like the common user to like every other state of legal privacy and many other people touching on different aspects of AI, which they still need to be familiar with a lot of the technicalities or a simplification or like a rewriting of those technicalities so that they're easy to be consumed by them. So that's where, like, as I agree totally that education, it's something that we need to do more. And especially because AI has been part of everything nowadays, we need to make sure that our users understand why and how AI is intertwined with their experience. That's one thing. The other part on like how academia and industry consume and produce research and how they approach responsible AI, it's important. One aspect that it's very, very clear and evident to me in how translating academic knowledge into industry is the factor of scale. Usually I get people telling me like, come on, this problem has been solved. I saw a paper in this conference that like they claim this is solved. Yes, it's solved when you are applying to a tiny portion of the manifold, or like when you start like processing trillions of data points per day. I mean, the cost of your false positives might be way bigger, or the false negatives might be like some impact that you cannot foresee. Let me like rewind to the example again of the deepfake competition. One of the outcomes that we had in that competition is like, yes, we have amazing methods that detect everything. You put that or you try that with real data, well, it doesn't work. We have a paper now, like it fails. Like the precision recall are very bad with respect. Yeah, there's a problem that usually you assume that you have one bad example and one good example, or the unevenness of the distribution is of 1 to 10. No, the problem is when you go to real distribution, it goes 1 to 100 million or 1 to a billion. Then you have problems at the scale that do not get captured, or it's not like referred enough into the academic world. So one of the barriers between these two worlds is like, how do we get into a position where like we can speak the same language again, like you research how this translates to real outcomes to the users, and what is the gap that we have to bridge still nowadays. That is one of the main issues I see day to day when trying like to, this amazing paper, let me put it in production, like, well, this is a lot more work that I anticipated. And then it's, and again, like the reciprocate is people like in our corporations, like working more with academia to make sure that we can leverage that knowledge. And that's why like almost, I guess, every corporation has like strong ties with universities and research centers and partnership on AI and others, just to make sure that we can nurture and like we can hear each other for that. And that's to me a key part of the puzzle to work together towards a more responsible AI future.
Yeah, I would, in speaking specifically to like language models, I think this is a huge issue. One thing that I keep telling people whenever people ask me like, so Luther AI, the research group I'm a part of, is kind of an open research group, and a lot of people kind of drop by and they're like, hey, if I want to get involved, what's the easiest, how does one get started? And kind of my go-to thing is there are dozens of fascinating papers, especially ones about interpretability and about privacy and about security of language models that we're trained on like 10 million to 300, 500 million parameter models. And they're really interesting papers, but there's really no insight into whether they're going to work for the kinds of models that companies are deploying in practice. And it's a lot of work to kind of adopt them, and it's often really hard to predict which models are going to, which approaches and technologies are going to be appropriate at scale and which ones are not. I was recently working with this with a model privacy methodology, trying to test it and validate it, and I found that there was a dependency on the number of classes it was designed for a classifier model, and it only worked if the number of classes was massive. Like it worked for ImageNet and it didn't work for CFAR 100. And that just wasn't something that the authors had noticed, because they had done experiments on ImageNet and it worked, and they were like, yes, this works. But so you can easily end up with dependencies on things you don't anticipate. The language that you're working in, the the number of classes that your classifiers are trained on. And it's really important to get replications and reproductions of your work and to try things on different scales and with different data sets, because those kinds of pitfalls come up a lot.
Definitely. I think that's those are all fascinating insights in the sense that those are things that get missed between academia and industry. And I imagine for a lot of people who work at these places, come from an academic background, having spent many years there, and then transitioning into industry, and seeing some of these challenges, but perhaps never talking about them explicitly or widely. And that's why I like that question. I think that was great. Given that we have about 4.5 minutes to close, and I know we're all in the middle of our workday, as I said, all like back to what we were doing before. Not that this has not been fascinating. If each of you could chime in with maybe a 30 seconds to a minute for on advice for people who are early in their career, people who are just moving from university to industry, what is it that they can do to be better equipped and prepared to apply these responsible AI principles to products and services that you would build in industry?
I can start. So my suggestion is that responsible AI is not optional. It is a must. It's not something that you could say, hey, I'm an expert on these technologies, or I'm an expert on AI. Good, let me find a good job. AI has become such a prevalent part of our lives everywhere, from social media to your toothbrush that has like an AI on it, that you must understand what are the consequences of putting models in production. So that's where we have like some of the big conferences, and I hope almost every conference has a section on try to assess what could be the consequences of your paper, of your research. That must be part of the design process, and not only enforced by companies or institutions, but as far as the ethics code of any researcher doing research on AI. That's a must. It's like the oath that doctors take when they start practicing. That's a kind of, you should evolve to having something similar like that for AI. I think we are early in this journey, but I would love to see one day no, you are a practitioner, you are a researcher, you must comply to these few rules that are the absolute good for doing the right thing for the world. I think we should aim towards that end journey. Responsible AI is not optional. It should be part of everything.
Thanks, Christian. So if I may add specifically for, say, maybe graduate students or professors who may be listening to this. So I have two thoughts. One is that it's not only problems that are of importance to industry, right? There are a variety of responsible AI problems where there may not be sufficient interest from tech companies, right? This could be outside tech companies, for instance, whether it's criminal justice or other domains. I think it's very important for us to look into those domains as well, not focus just on problems which are important to the tech companies. So I think that's one broader perspective I have. The second perspective is that if you think of problems which are relevant in practice, I would start with even conferences like MLSys, and machine learning and systems, or the applied data science or industry tracks of various conferences, KDD for instance, where often the focus of the papers may be more on not necessarily developing new techniques, but what are the challenges involved when we take known techniques and apply them in practice? What are the scalability challenges? What are the other types of challenges? I would go there. Or more broadly, I think it's important for us to look at how do these different dimensions interact with each other, whether it is privacy, fairness, explainability, robustness. What are the trade-offs? What are the challenges when we consider this in large-scale systems?
And Stella, you have any parting thoughts for us?
Yeah, I would say that there is always that if you're moving to a company and you're interested in starting to get involved with kind of integrating these kinds of tools and techniques into your work, the best first thing you can do is start conversations with people who have more power than you. And it can be awkward, asking people like, have you considered doing XYZ? I noticed that we were doing this. Why aren't we doing it that way? But starting conversations, and you're gonna find people that agree with you, and finding who those people are, especially when they're senior to you and have more experience than you, is, in my experience, extremely important, and allows you to get a lot done in practice that you might not feel comfortable doing on your own.
Absolutely. So find your tribe. There are others out there who are interested in this. Find them, band with them, talk to them, and share these ideas widely. I think that's really what we need to do. This has been fascinating. I learned so much. I hope everybody listening in, both here on Zoom and on YouTube, did as well. Thank you for fielding all these questions, Christian, Stella, Krishnaram. These were some of them thorny questions, some of them perhaps easier, but overall, I think we got to cover quite a bit of this. I really appreciate all of you making the time for this town hall. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. We really appreciate your time, and a virtual applause. If this was a physical room, would have been better, but hey, this is what we got, right? Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Christian.
Thanks, Abhishek, and the organizers of the Trustworthy ML Symposium for inviting us.
Our pleasure, Krishna. Thank you to Stella as well. For those who are tuning in, please stick around. You'll be in very responsible, trustworthy hands with Chirag, who is going to be leading the breakout rooms and a small social that we have, where we can continue to talk about everything that's been discussed so far in the panel, in the town hall. We'll have breakout rooms that will cover 5 subjects. So we'll have interpretability, is unfairness a security risk, outer distribution robustness, fairness, and causal inference, all very exciting areas. We'd invite you to take part. The icebreaker that Chirag will lead will be quite exciting. And then, of course, the breakout rooms and an opportunity to share what you guys are working on. So please stick around and join us in about 12 minutes from now. And